Pretty much every Canadian at least considers the idea of spending a chunk of their retirement in a warmer and cheaper country. But doing it full time? Well, that's a whole different animal. My name is Reese. I'm the founder of Well Built Wealth, and today we are looking at key pros and cons of kissing Canada goodbye and retiring abroad. So let's get right to it and start with the pros. Pro number one, lower cost of living. This is so obvious it feels kind of dumb even saying it, but it's a huge pro, so we gotta deal with it. Many countries offer a significantly lower cost of living than Canada. Many of the things that would eat up normally a huge chunk of your budget every month in retirement, like housing and food, can cost a lot less elsewhere. And what that really means is that your money can last way longer, which obviously is very appealing to a lot of people, especially if retiring in Canada is going to be a struggle. Now let me show you very quickly what I mean here visually. Luella Punella is retiring next year. She knows her budget inside and out, and based on where she lives on the outskirts of Toronto, she knows she's going to need $5,000 a month to get by. Well, based on the resources and pension she has, she's looking at a tough situation. She is tracking at about 59% of what she needs to make that happen. Now, if she were able to relocate to a place where she could comfortably live on $4,000 a month instead of $5,000 a month, look at what a difference that makes for her situation. She jumps from being 59% on track to 81%. And if she were able to make it work on $3,500 a month, she shoots up to 104%. Now, please don't get caught up in the exact numbers here. All I'm trying to do is clearly illustrate the profound difference that a lower cost of living can make. It can take you from not doable to totally doable. Now, of course, there are some countries where the cost of living is next to nothing, but you probably don't want to live there. So you're going to want to look at options that are more affordable, but are still safe and offer a decent quality of life. And one good way to test that out is to look into the expat communities that are already there. Do the people who have already done this actually like it? Are they happy there? Now, you can and should do your own research on this, but countries that typically hit the top of the lists are Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Colombia, Portugal, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines. But obviously, there are many others, and there is no rule saying that you have to stay in just one. And now on to the next no-brainer. Pro number two. Better weather. I don't think there's much else to say about this. My wife and I just spent a whole bunch of money to leave this so we could have this. Enough said. Pro number three, potential tax benefits. Now, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with this topic in this particular video, but depending on your situation, you really could save quite a bit. But that will depend a lot on the country that you're moving to and whether or not they have a tax treaty with Canada. For instance, many things like RRSP/RIF withdrawals or CPP payments will face an automatic 25% withholding tax from Canada if you're no longer a resident of Canada. But if there's a favorable tax treaty with the country that you're moving to, then that could be lowered by quite a bit, which could mean that you could pay quite a bit less tax on that income if you were living in a different country than you would on that exact same income if you were living in Canada, which in plain English simply means that you get to keep more of your money. Now, all that said, you do need to keep in mind the so-called departure tax as well. Essentially, when you become a non-resident, the Canadian government treats all of your assets as though they've been sold, whether they have or haven't. And while many types of accounts and pensions are exempt from this, things like non-registered accounts are not. So you have to take all of that into consideration when trying to figure out how worth it is. For some, the impact could be next to nothing, but for some, it can be pretty ugly. Pro number four, chill pace of life. This is actually a big deal. Western culture is not relaxed at all. Time is money, baby. But there are many other cultures that don't think like that at all. I remember I pulled up to an island in Belize one time called Key Cocker. And the entry point to the island from the boat taxi that we took was this big long dock. And at the end of the dock, entering the island, was this big sign that said, "Go slow," which was clearly the theme for the island. And so that's exactly what I did. And it was awesome. Pro number 5, adventure. We deal with a ton of people moving into the retirement phase who are simply chomping at the bit for a chance to finally get to do a bunch of the things that they just didn't have the time to do before. And now, obviously, you can find adventure without leaving Canada, but you can find a lot more kinds of it if you do. Now, obviously, that's not for everybody, but for some people, oh yeah. All right, now that's enough of the pros. Let's get into the cons of retiring abroad. And the first is maybe the biggest: healthcare concerns. Now, we're at an interesting time in Canada. Our healthcare system is, how do I say this nicely? Struggling. It's gone from something we used to brag about to something we do our best to avoid. But even so, we still trust it, and it does still work, even if it is a bit rickety. And so the thought of moving to another country and finding ourselves in a position where we may not have access to good medical care when we actually really need it is actually deeply unnerving. And that's totally fair. So you're definitely going to want to do your research, and you're definitely going to want to line up the appropriate insurance before you go. But I will say this: medical tourism has become a big thing. People actually leave Canada and take trips to developing countries to get their medical issues sorted on a regular basis now. And they're doing it for good reasons. Some of the medical facilities in many of the countries that I listed earlier are world class. The care is top shelf, their prices are way cheaper than you'd think, and there are little to no waits. So yeah, solid healthcare is a legitimate concern, but these days it may turn out to be less of one than you'd think. Con number 2, exchange rate and financial risks. Many people who move out of Canada actually choose to leave the bulk of their financial assets in Canada and simply take out what they need when they need it. And that's because we have a serious system here. We've got laws, protections, and regulations that go way back. And we have really developed markets. And not all countries have this. In fact, many aren't even close. So it may feel just a bit sketchy to move all of your eggs into a basket that might just have a bunch of holes in it. Now, one thing I will point out is that many Canadian financial institutions can become pretty tough to deal with once you become a non-resident. There are a few that cater to working with international clients, but for the most part, most financial institutions are going to have internal compliance regulations that are going to severely limit the kinds of transactions that they can or will do for you. So you're definitely going to want to have that discussion with your financial institution before taking off. Exchange rates can add a bit of drama to the party too. If the currency that you're switching to is dropping in value relative to the Canadian dollar, that can be awesome, because then your Canadian dollars can buy even more of their dollars. But when it goes the other way, it can definitely poop on the party, because now you get less of their dollars, which is no bueno. Con number 3, residency and legal issues. Visa and residency requirements can be tricky issues to navigate, and they differ from country to country. And finding honest and competent help to deal with them can be a whole nother can of worms. So basically, get ready to do a lot of homework. Con number 4, and this is a biggie: distance from family and friends. Now, maybe escaping your friends and family is exactly part of the plan for you, but for many people, it's not. And retiring abroad can actually turn out to be quite lonely, because the cost of traveling back and forth is actually really high. And whether it's you going back to Canada to see them or having them come down wherever you are to see you, because of the costs, it actually usually ends up meaning that it just doesn't happen nearly as often as you may have hoped for. And obviously, missing out on things like watching your grandchildren grow up is a massive downside. Con number 5, cultural and language barriers. Adjusting to a new culture and learning a new language can be fun, but it could also drive you crazy in ways that you maybe never saw coming. Simple things like shopping, dealing with a neighbor, doing paperwork with a local business, or dealing with the governmental bureaucracy, which you were sure possibly couldn't be worse than where you came from. All of that could lead to you potentially developing a bit of an eye twitch. And finally, con number 6, losing Canadian benefits. The fact is, some of your benefits as a Canadian will follow you no matter where you go and for how long you go, but some, like your provincial health plan, won't, or at least they won't follow you for very long. So you're definitely going to want to make a list of the benefits you are or will be entitled to as a resident of the province you are in, and then look into how they are handled if you leave. And of course, you're definitely going to want to know what happens to your Canada pension plan and old age security benefits, since these can be a substantial amount of money. Luckily, I have a full video on exactly that topic, which you can check out simply by clicking here. So, there you have it. Retiring abroad has plenty of benefits, but it's obviously not for everybody. You gotta weigh the pros and you gotta weigh the cons. You gotta do your research, and you definitely have to spend a bunch of time in the places that you're eyeballing before you pull the trigger.